Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome back, those of you that are here with us live, and everyone that's watching on the live stream tonight. Welcome back to our Grow series. This is a 3-part session on how to share your faith, how to engage somebody outside of the Christian faith. And tonight is session 2, where we're going to be talking about how we should approach Christians that have little to no interest in spiritual things, which is a very difficult thing for us to do, and we'll get to that in a moment. So let's just review a little bit about last week. Last week in session 1, we talked about evangelism itself, what it means, where the commission for that to evangelism came from, how it originated when Jesus, right before he ascended up into heaven, in the book of Matthew, it's recorded where he tells the church to go and to make disciples of all people. And the disciples were not just the 11 that were left. They were all the church that were there watching Jesus. Hundreds of people were there watching him ascend up into heaven. And that commission is for us as well today. We then looked at how the early church practiced the Great Commission and what they did to fulfill that command by Jesus. And then we talked a lot about what the barriers are in today's culture to us going out and evangelizing the world. So we'll see tonight that the method of evangelism sometimes can trump the message. We talked a little bit about that last week. We'll do a little bit about that again tonight. But it's something that we have to be very, very careful about, because we do not want the way we're sharing our faith with somebody to overshadow the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. We want the focus, and for the person that's on the receiving end to clearly hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we never want the way we're presenting it to be an obstacle to that person coming to know the Lord. Secondly, we need to use wisdom when we're approaching people about Christianity. And that's really where the Holy Spirit comes into play. And we need to be in tune with what the Spirit is telling us and how we want to approach that person, because we know everybody is different. And everybody's at a different place in their life. Everybody has had different experiences with the church if they are not a Christian. And the Holy Spirit will guide us as to how we should approach these people. And we'll see, because everyone is different, there is no one cookie-cutter way to evangelize. What we're going to talk about tonight is there's a lot of different ways, and people will be at different places in their life. And we'll talk about how to identify where they are, and then what you should do to communicate with them. And then we also talked last week about how evangelism should be relational, not just informational. We are not just presenting information to people. We want them to understand and to know that we care. We are doing this because we want that person to have the same relationship with Jesus Christ that we have, and that we care about what's going to happen to them after they die, where their soul is going to spend eternity. We're not just doing it to hand out information, to print a bunch of tracts and just go and pass them out in an airport or in the mall. We want people to understand and for us to communicate one-on-one with the other people and invest in their lives from ours. So this next video, we'll see the whole process begins with trust. And we need the non-Christian person to trust the Christian and the message that we're delivering to them. So turn in your handouts to page 13. That's where we'll begin tonight. And have your pen handy, because they're going to ask you to fill in that table at the bottom of page 13. So let's watch the video on trust.
According to a recent survey, which occupations do Americans say they trust the most? As a table, you've got 2 minutes to order the jobs listed in your workbooks from 1 to 10. A 1 represents the job Americans rated the highest in terms of honesty and ethical standards. A 10 would be the lowest. Only one person needs to write down your table's answers. Ready? Go.
So simply take your pen and rank them 1 through 10, who you think is the most trustworthy to the least trustworthy.
Okay, time's up. Let's see how you did.
Was there any doubt that the Congress people were at the bottom of the... No, there was not any doubt. I know Pastor Rick was sweating where the clergy were going to fall in the list. So it is good that they were in the top half. But you saw from the general rankings on that list that professions that tended to help people or teach people or help them medically or help them spiritually tended to rank higher in the survey rather than ones that were seen as not always truthful, that used car salesman trying to sell you his broken car, or the congressperson who is lying to you. If their lips are moving, they're lying to you, basically. So, and this is important because where the non-Christian person sees the Christian, that if he does not feel as if the Christian is being truthful to them, then we're going to see that that is the first roadblock to them actually listening to the gospel that's coming out of your mouth. So we're going to see another video that talks about the 5 thresholds of faith. And what these 5 thresholds of faith are the stages that an unbeliever goes through before making a decision for salvation. And these 5 thresholds of faith come from a book called I Once Was Lost, written by the authors Don Everts and Doug Shepp. And these men were pastors, and they worked in full-time different Christian ministries. And over a 10-year period, they interviewed 2,000 people and asked them to sequence for them what they went to before and during and then after their salvation experience. And they accumulated all of this information, And they noticed that there were a lot of similarities from these 2,000 people, where basically there were 5 different sequences, and the video that we're about to watch will tell us what those are. So the 5 thresholds video.
At some level, all of us who have placed our faith in Jesus desire to share about him with others. And why wouldn't we? It's great news. But the word we use for this, evangelism, has a lot of baggage that comes with it. Why is that? Maybe it's because it never seems to go that well. Or we've seen it done so poorly by others and we've thought to ourselves, no way I'm doing that. But instead of just beating ourselves up, maybe we need to give ourselves permission to look at evangelism differently. If we take a step back and take a fresh look at the whole process, not from our perspective, but from the perspective of other people, we will see that traditional evangelism assumes a lot about the evangelizee. You know what? That's not even a real word. Let's just call him Dan. After all, he is a person, not a project. Now, traditional evangelism assumes a lot about Dan. We assume he's at a place in his life where he's open, he's interested, and he's just sitting around waiting on someone to come along with the perfect answers to his most pressing questions. So when it comes to evangelism, we're typically taught to make sure we're prepared with a bunch of correct answers to any of Dan's potential questions. We just need to remember that sometimes people are looking for more than just information. And with that in mind, what we'd like you to pay attention to is where people actually are on their journey to faith. You see, what we've learned is that there are many thresholds a person goes through before seeking answers to their questions about God. We have come across a helpful resource that identifies 5 thresholds that people go through on their path to faith in Jesus, 3 of which begin way before the place modern evangelism typically starts. Each person on their journey to faith in Jesus is unique. With that being said, we have noticed some common trends when it comes to people's journey to faith. So, let's go back to Dan. Let's say Dan is your neighbor. He's married with 2 kids, he works at an accounting firm downtown, and he's pretty disinterested in God stuff. You know this, of course, because after you invited him to church a couple months ago, he started pretending to get phone calls every time he saw you in the driveway. At this point, he doesn't even have questions. Dan just needs to be able to trust a Christian. A recent study in the book Unchristian showed that 97% of 16 to 29-year-olds have a neutral or bad impression of evangelical Christians. That isn't something that we can ignore. So, what's the best thing we can do for Dan at this point, given everything we know about his journey? We can earn his trust. Don't worry about the answers yet. Don't have an agenda. Just ask questions about his family. Take an interest in him. Just listen. So maybe the win for you is that you may be the first Christian that someone has ever trusted. And that's a big deal. You've helped them take the first step on their journey. Once Dan gets to the place where he trusts you, it's only natural that he would cross through the second threshold, which is becoming curious about your faith. Maybe Dan starts to ask some questions. Celebrate that. Well, I mean to yourself, of course. The best thing you can do for Dan at this point in the journey is to help provoke his curiosity. And don't worry, you don't have to have all the answers. I don't know is fine. It actually lets Dan know that you have some of the same questions he does. Side note, Jesus was asked around 183 questions in the New Testament. How many times did he give explicit answers? Only 3. But how many questions did he ask in return? 307. Threshold 2 is where your main role is to provoke their curiosity by asking good questions. Questions that show that you're genuinely curious about them, and questions to help them discover what it is they really want to know. A lot of times, Dan's curiosity will lead them to the next threshold, which is being open to change. This might actually be the hardest threshold for most people. Scratch that, it is. Change is difficult for all of us. Dan may trust you and he may be really curious, but he just isn't open to change yet. And that's okay. The best thing you can do here is to be patient. Don't give up on Dan if he's not fitting into your timeline. Trying to force the issue might actually do more harm than good at this point. Threshold 3 can be difficult, but hang in there because our patience makes it easier for someone to take the next step. If and when Dan becomes open to change, this openness will lead him to the 4th threshold, which we call seeking after God. This is where evangelism approaches assume most people start. Do you see what opportunities we'd miss if we just started out here with Dan? But because he's gone at his own pace, now Dan is becoming aware that there are some implications to following Jesus. And because of that, he may ask more questions. He may still have doubts about all of it. He may still try to cling to the life that he's used to. The best thing you and I can do for Dan at this point is let him know that he is not alone. You've been there. You have faith and you have doubts. And just a side note, you know doubt is okay, right? Genuine faith includes doubt. Being real about your journey makes faith attractive to other people. The fifth and last threshold in Dan's journey to faith is where he is ready to enter into a relationship with God. He's learned what he needs about how Jesus has made a way for him to know God, and he's ready to put his trust in him. Okay, those were the 5 thresholds, and we know that's a lot of information, but we think this is important for you to know. We believe that you are much more important than any curriculum or video we could give you. We seem to put this pressure on ourselves to be the one with all the answers. The tendency is to want to hurry people along in the process, but it's more important that you journey with someone rather than try to take the journey for them. So, we hope you'll use these 5 thresholds as a guide to help you identify and respond based on where other people are on their journey towards God.
So these 5 thresholds of faith will be the bulk of what we talk about now for the remainder of tonight. Tonight we'll concentrate on the first 3 thresholds, and then next week we'll discuss the last 2, when a person is ready to receive. They're curious and open and wanting to know more about faith and are ready to make that commitment to Christ. So that'll be our concentration. So remember, threshold 1, trusting a Christian. Threshold 2, becoming curious about the faith. It doesn't mean they're ready to be in depth in conversation about spiritual things, but they're beginning to see a difference between you as the Christian and the non-Christian world. And they're starting to get curious about that. Why do you react that way? Why do you talk that way? Why do you do these certain things? 3, as they pointed out in the video, it's the most difficult thing for a person to go through is to be open to change. When they come to the place where they're ready to stop and leave the comfort of wherever they're at in their life at that point and begin to want to become a spiritual person and to make that life and have that personal relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And then after that, it's all downhill. Number 4, seeking after God. They're wanting to know the details. They're wanting to know how they become, a Christian and have that personal relationship with God. Find out all the things that Jesus has done for them. And number 5, actually leading the person to actually become a Christian. So we'll go through all of these steps in detail. So number 1, trusting a Christian. Take a look at this next photograph. So this is a real event that happened a couple of years ago where people were out evangelizing on a street corner. And immediately, I'm offended by that picture. And I'm offended by the picture. And this is a perfect example of what we were talking about, how the method can overshadow the message. Where when you go and you look at those signs, where is the gospel message in those signs? It's not. Those are meant to shock people and they're meant to get people's attention, but that's not going to lead the people to a relationship or a conversation about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So let's move on from that slide. And here is what author Doug Schaap has to say in his book about our culture and Christianity today. He says, in another day and age, God, religion, and the church enjoyed the general respect of culture, our culture here in the United States. But not today. Religion is suspect. Church, to the average non-Christian, is weird. And Christians are all hypocrites. because they hear what Christianity says, and yet they observe the lives of the Christians, and we don't live it. So distrust has become the norm. And that's a sad place where our society is today. But it's something that we have to understand and realize that when you approach a non-Christian person, whether it's your neighbor, whether it's a coworker, whether it's a family member, this is the perspective that they are coming from, and this is what you're going to have to overcome with them as you present the gospel to them. And that quote is consistent with what that survey said in the video, and it shocked me. 97% of the young people under the age of 30, have a negative or at least a neutral opinion of evangelical Christians. And I thought, well, evangelical Christians. I said, wait a minute, that's us. Evangelical Christians are people that are sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that is what our church mission is, to lead people through faith in Jesus Christ into a relationship with God. And that's our mission. And that is what we were commissioned to do by Jesus himself. And so we have our work cut out for us. And that's the next generation of leaders in the church. If only 3% have a favorable view of Christians. So it's a difficult job, and we see that Satan has done a great job basically infiltrating our culture and the minds of whether it's people through school education or just social media or whatever it is in our culture today. But it has had a tremendous negative impact on the younger generation. And the statistics are not much better as you go older in the decades. So let's first look at trust from our perspective, from the Christian who's approaching a non-Christian person. So our typical reaction when we are getting ready and to talk to a non-Christian person who doesn't trust us is first we'll want to defend our character or our opinion. That's just a normal reaction, a normal response. But the problem is getting into an argument with a person is never going to lead them to Christ. Again, that deflects from the message. Satan is perfectly happy for us to get into an argument. He wants you talking about everything but the gospel of Jesus Christ. So we have to control our emotions. We have to be careful and understand that this is something you'll experience. If a person pushes back hard when you're talking to them, even about non-spiritual things, our tendency is to want to defend ourselves, and we need to try and dial that back and control that and get beyond that and keep your mind focused on what is the ultimate goal of why I want a relationship with this person. The second thing we normally will see is our feelings get hurt, our egos get bruised. And again, we have to think about it's not about us, it's about helping the other person enter into the kingdom of God. So basically, we have to take ourselves out of this and not worry about what other people think, because we know where they're coming from, we know how they're going to respond, and we know what they're thinking. So it's completely normal for them to verbalize it to us, and if we expect it, then we won't be shocked by it, and we won't be as hurt or defensive about it. And then the third thing we'll find ourselves doing is if you're in an uncomfortable situation, the person is being very negative to you while you're trying to outreach to them, we tend to avoid those people in the future. And that is a completely human response. And I find myself doing that before I retired and I was at work, there were people that irritated me to no end, and I would avoid them. I didn't want to talk to them, even though sometimes you had to work with them. Yet Christ calls us to love everybody, even the people that are obnoxious, even the people that hate you. That's what made the gospel so unusual and Christianity so unusual? He's telling his followers to love your enemies. Well, if we have to love our enemy that wants to hurt us and kill us, well, then we should be able to love the person who's obnoxious to us or mean to us or says hurtful things to us. But it's difficult. So we have to watch ourselves from wanting to avoid that person. Next, it's typical for us in Christian love to judge the other person instead of trying to understand them. And that is exactly how non-Christian people view Christians in the church. Always looking down on them, always wanting to judge them, and saying, yeah, well, they think they're better than we are. And that is the viewpoint that the non-Christian person has. And we don't want to fall into that trap. And we have to be very careful about that. Because we are not perfect. We are just forgiven. And that is what the Christian has to focus on. That judgment has no place in our relationships with anybody. And Jesus doesn't want us. We need to look at everyone that we come into contact with the same love that Jesus looked out at the world. And the fifth thing is another typical reaction is when someone doesn't trust us, we like to prepare an argument. And it's like, well, I say this, they responded with this, and next time I'm going to be ready. I'm going to have my argument ready. I'm going to convince them that that's the way to go. Salvation is the way to go, and I'm going to say A, B, C, D. The problem with that is we're not trying to win an argument or to intellectually convince somebody that they should become a Christian, because they have to realize that their need for Christ and their change comes from the inside out. We want a heart change. We don't just want to convince them intellectually, because no matter how good and persuasive you are intellectually, convincing that person, Satan can bring somebody that's more eloquent than we are behind you and unconvince the person very simply. It's when we want to get the person to the point where they realize that they're missing something, that they realize they need the shed blood of Jesus Christ in their life, that's when they want to make that change. And then it changes them from the inside out, and they become a new person. And then the Holy Spirit is working on everything else as they begin to grow and mature as a Christian. So preparing an argument never works because it's not an intellectual discussion. So that's another typical thing that we have to be careful from to not get in the way of our gospel presentation. And what we find is a person who is in threshold number 1 that does not trust what the Christian has to say, they will not respond to conversations about spiritual matters. They're not ready for that yet because they don't trust what you have to say. So you can tell them the gospel, but they're not ready to receive it. They're not ready to ask you questions about it. They're not ready to think about it as soon as you're gone and out of their earshot. They are just not at that point in their life. So they're not ready to listen to conversations about spiritual matters. And 2, they're not even ready for invitations to anything that's church-related. So they're not necessarily ready. And you'll know, because if you go and invite somebody to church and they give you some excuse. So Saturday or Sunday mornings is the only time I have to wash my car. And it's pollen season, and I've got to make my car look good because I go out and visit clients all during the week, and I don't have time during the week, but I've got to make my car look good. Well, that's an excuse. Or they avoid you, and they don't want to talk to you about it. Or whatever the excuse is, they just turn you down. Or what's near and dear to our hearts, we have the Christmas tree every holiday season in early December outside for the very purpose to try and bring unchurched people, neighbors, coworkers to our parking lot to hear beautiful Christian music at Christmas time. And that's a non-confrontational setting. And you might get a few more people that are ready to go there, But the person who is not trusting anything in that first threshold isn't even going to want to do that. They might tell you that they're going to come and then they never show up. So you ask yourself, what can we do then when we're dealing with a person that is this distrustful of believers? Well, consider these. Number one, begin to pray for that person. And as we begin it, and we're not talking just a superficial prayer that one time you say, God, just convict that person of their need for Christ. No, praying for someone by name over and over and over again is part of your daily prayer time. When you're praying for your family members, when you're praying for the sick that you know of, when you're praying for God's providence upon this ministry, and praying for that person's salvation and praying for them by name, you begin to care for them, even if you've been repulsed by that neighbor in the past. But over time, you begin to love them as Christ loves them, as he loved everyone. And then, when you're having that conversation, at least that care, that love, people can sense that when they're having a conversation with you. So pray for them because it will help you change from the inside out in terms of being able to have a connection with that person. And also we have to be careful, number two, listen to their perspective because they're going to have a completely different perspective than you do. And a good rule of thumb is listen to them twice as much as you're talking to them. And why is that important? Because you are going to get to know them by listening to what they have to say. You're going to get to know them by the answers that they give to the questions that you give to them. And it shows you really care about them when you are listening to what their perspective is. And that's how a person will begin, that wall will begin to melt between the two of you, and they'll begin to actually engage you in conversation. The third thing is potentially bond over some common interests. Well, if you're two guys and you know that they're a sports fanatic, possibly a Jaguars fan, you now have somebody to commiserate with because it's been a painful conversation over the last 20 years. And two guys can bond over sports or bond over cars if cars are your thing, or whatever the interest is. Two people must have some type of common interest, whether it's maintaining your yards or maybe they're into completely decorating and they're into landscaping and their yard is perfectly maintenance. Start engaging them in conversation about those things. There's got to be some common interest between the two of you. And if there is, use that and talk about those things. Have that as conversation starters that lead then into other things. So look for those kinds of common interests. There may be some. The fourth thing is, at some point in a conversation when you're talking, you can affirm positive characteristics about them. But we have to be very careful here because they don't necessarily trust you yet. You could be somewhere on the trust meter, maybe beginning to grow in trust, but it has to be natural. It can't be something forced. It can't be something that confronts them out of left field. So if you find something, just affirm it. And people are always thankful when there's some positive reinforcement that they get or some praise from another person. So just make sure that it's something that's very natural, that's part of a conversation, and it's not something weird. Number 5, and probably one of the most important things, is welcome them into your life story, which means the sharing is not just a one-way street. You have to begin to open up and share with them. Talk about yourself, because it's something that it is what two people do when they have a relationship together, and it lets them see you as a real person with real feelings and real passions. If you are living the Christian life and you are in tune with the Holy Spirit and you are fulfilling the Great Commission, they're going to see differences in your life and theirs, and they're going to start to become curious about that. So let them get to know you and how important Jesus and spiritual things are in your life as you're sharing conversation with them. And they'll begin to see that, and they'll begin to ask questions. The sixth thing you should do is look for opportunities to help them. And these are things in life. Maybe you see them out raking in the yard. You love to rake. Go over and ask if you can help. Maybe you see someone and you hear that they're having car problems and you have a spare car. Well, maybe you can, while they're getting their car fixed, you can take them to a doctor's appointment. Or you're running to the market, you say, hey, can I get you anything? Those kinds of things. Just look for opportunities to be helped. This is what people should do for other people, should do for neighbors, should do for people when you love them. And so absolutely look for opportunities to help them, because that will only help to grow your relationship with those people. As well as the last one, which is probably also one of the most important things, is be genuine. Everyone can spot a fake. No one will trust one word that you say if they do not think you're being genuine and you are just going through some recipe. Oh, I'm talking to you and, oh, wait a minute, I have an answer for that, and you're looking through some papers and some notes. No. Like we talked about last week, you have a story to tell that is uniquely yours. You know what your life was before you became a Christian, why you became a Christian, what led up to you becoming a Christian, and how you became a Christian. And all you have to do is tell your story. Tell how that worked for you at some point in the conversation. Tell them why in your life now spiritual things are important to you, why it's important for you to help people, or why it's important for you to fellowship with other Christians, or to do service projects and to help in the community, those kinds of things. So everyone can spot a fake, be genuine, and they'll never trust you if you're not genuine. So these 7 things should help you when dealing with the non-trusting person. It should help to be able to break that down. Now, we're going to take some time for some personal reflection. So think about this for a moment. Ask yourself this question: which parts of your spiritual journey should you share with a non-Christian who doesn't trust Christians? You have to think through this ahead of time before you get into a position where you have the opportunity to do that. At this point in a relationship, especially if you don't know the person very well, you may want to share certain things but not others, and that's perfectly acceptable. So you should kind of think through those things as to what's important and what parts you should leave out and why. Just rationalize those in your mind. So just take a minute or so to think about that, or maybe jot down some answers to that. So now you're going to be dealing with the person who is beginning to trust you. You've melted that wall of mistrust, and they are now becoming curious about the faith. And what we've seen is curiosity is really a 3-step process. The first step is that they've become aware that something is different about you. They might not know what it is. They just have this feeling there's something different. And it might be the way you talk. It might be the way you react to certain things. It might be the way you act or the way you treat others. We know that Jesus, when he was teaching in Matthew 5 on the Sermon on the Mount, he said this to his disciples and all the people that were listening. Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. And this is what the non-believer is going to see when he is spending time with you, that you're different. And that is the light of Jesus shining through you. And that's exactly what we want. And that person is going to be curious and going to begin asking questions. And that's where you get to share your story. You can't prepare for those questions other than to be ready to respond. The second thing with a step in curiosity is you'll see engagement or exploration, where they're beginning to ask you questions and you begin to open up your life. And it's best at this stage to give simple but direct answers. If they ask you a question, you don't need to go into a 60-minute response, because that may begin to push them further away. Again, you just simple, direct. There's plenty of time later to get into more in-depth answers. So simple, direct answers. And also look at this as more of an exchange of ideas. It's not an argument. It's not where you're trying to hit them over the head, but it's back and forth as you get to know one another and understand what they like, your understanding about their background, how they grew up, their family, what's important to them, what they like, what they dislike, what their spiritual background is, if any. Most people in this country have had some type of exposure to Christianity. Many people who don't go to church today were raised in a church, and there was a reason why they left church. You never know. When I was working in Alabama, and I was working for a contractor, and we were doing a lot of painting, there were a lot of painters there that were ex-pastors, but you would never know that. And something happened along the way where they left their calling, and now they're painting houses or painting walls. Everybody has a story, and you want to get to know their story, because it will help you bring them to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. So that exchange of ideas. Some of the strategies at this point when their curiosity is beginning to peak is learn more about the other person by asking questions. I thought that was fantastic when they shared about Jesus. All these people asked him questions, hundreds of questions that are recorded for us in the gospel. And he answered 3. Well, he, being God, knew the motives behind a lot of those questions, and instead he turned it around and asked them questions, we know, in response. And he used those as teaching moments. Well, we can ask questions that produce more questions. Here's an example. Asking a person, do you go to church? Typically would get a yes or a no response, where maybe a better question in that situation would be, well, growing up, what was your religious experience? This would require for them to give a more in-depth answer that would possibly lead you to ask additional questions. Well, you'll know an awful lot more about that person than whether they go to church or not today. So look for those types of questions that are open-ended and that are not simple yes or no or give you a number response. It's okay to ask those questions, but understand, ask more probing questions if you truly want to understand more about who the person is and what they're thinking. And again, another thing we need to be careful of as Christians is ask in a non-judgmental way. They already don't trust Christians. They already think we're judging everyone outside of the church. So we do not want to reinforce that perception. So be very careful here and ask non-judgmental questions. And the third thing we have to be careful of is do not assume you know the answers. They may shock you. You may know them, you may not. It doesn't really matter. Let them give them to you. And this especially is what Jesus was very good at in asking questions back to the person and getting them to share themselves. So look at this quote from author Donald Miller. He says, "Building relationships isn't in the words you say, but in the questions you ask." So that's how to build and establish a relationship with somebody. Get them to trust what you're saying. And then second, share information. Begin at this stage sharing information about spiritual things, about who Jesus is, about what he did, but make it in small and helpful doses. Look at it this way. The person at this point has a small cup of curiosity. Well, you don't want to fill that cup with a fire hose. You'll blow it out of their hand, and you possibly get them to back off and to pull back from you in terms of a relationship. So just remember, you're on their schedule. They're opening up to you. Answer the questions and share information, but just do it in the beginning in manageable doses. There will be time again in the future for more in-depth conversations. So it's time, let's take another moment for some more personal reflection. Think about in your life, who is the best question asker that you know? What's unique about that person? Maybe the person that led you to know the Lord, how did they do that? Did they use questions in your conversion? So think about those things, and it would be possibly helpful, something for you to be able to utilize. So take a few moments to reflect on that. So we come to the third threshold, and this, all the interviews said, was the most difficult for the non-believer to get through. And that's someone who is willing to be open to change, to forget what they previously thought and be ready to accept something new. And it's a very difficult threshold because one, change can be humbling and it can be a little scary. Most people hate all kinds of change. And this is something, especially if a person has some strongly held beliefs for many decades of their lives, and we're asking them to completely change that. That could completely change who they are as a person, what they do as a person, the way they talk, and the way they act. That what we're asking them to do, it can turn their lives upside down. And that could be difficult for a person to, once they begin to realize, oh, they're really asking me to become like them. So change can be humbling and it can be scary. So we just have to know that they're coming from that perspective. And the second thing, change usually takes time. Most people aren't ready to embrace it as soon as they hear something new. Usually they're going to want to take time and reflect on it, and people usually like to change slowly. And the thing is, all people are different. The amount of time people take in this threshold is going to be different. The first person you talk to might blast right through there, start asking deep spiritual questions, get down on their knees and pray with you that day, where another person might take years. It could be a spouse, it could be a relative, and it could take decades. You never know. It's God's timetable. The Holy Spirit is working on the inside of that person, and He's basically using you as a vessel to bring the message to them and to answer questions. So be patient with them, because the amount of time they take can be different. And that's the first thing. When responding to people at this threshold, number one, it says be patient and then plan to be more patient. Because if we're not patient, we'll tend to push them further away. And if we don't have time for them, we'll push them further away. And then secondly, we have to choose carefully at this point when to challenge them. Because it's getting to the point where basically you're sharing the good news with them and challenging them to change certain beliefs. And when you see them begin to shut down or to get defensive or back off, then maybe we need to back off a little bit and give them some more time to think about these things, allow the Holy Spirit to continue to work on them, and allow them to basically listen to what you have to say and allow you to approach them and challenge them again at some point in the future. This is where we really have to allow the Holy Spirit to guide us, is when we're sharing with them and how aggressive to challenge somebody. Because again, everybody's different and every situation is different. Because some people, if they're your neighbor or a relative or a coworker, you're going to have a lot of time to be able to invest and to go slowly. But other situations where you're just in a casual, you're sitting together on a person on a 4-hour flight going across the country, well, you've got 4 hours to have that conversation with that person. So you might need to be a little more challenging and direct, because once you get off the plane, it's likely you're never going to see them again. But you want to make sure that you plant the seeds in their mind that God then will use somebody else to come behind you and then to continue that conversation with them and to allow them, again, to change and to grow and to ask more questions of them. So choose carefully when you challenge, especially if it's somebody that you know and you have a constant relationship with and you have time to get with them on a regular basis. Now, you need to ask yourself, does this person need me to be patient or to challenge them to change? And this is somebody or something that you're going to continually ask yourself when, after you're done having a conversation with them, as you're spending time alone, thinking through what just happened. It's like, well, do I need to challenge them more on that? Do I need to, the next time we get together, push them, ask them to make a commitment, ask them to change? You'll know when they're ready for the fourth threshold, which is seeking after God, and they're ready for deep spiritual conversations, usually by the questions that they're asking you or by the way they're responding to your challenges. So feel them out, listen to their responses, and you'll have a pretty good idea when they're ready to move on and to have that deep conversation with you. And that's when things get very exciting for you to help somebody begin that relationship with Jesus Christ. So, your last personal reflection is your homework for the week. So think about the people that you wrote down in session 1 in that spheres of influence exercise at the very end of our session last week. And ask yourself, is that person open to change? Which threshold are they at right now in these 5 steps? Are they in one of the first 3? And do they need me to be patient at this point with them or to challenge them to change? So think about those names that you wrote down, and this is for you to be ready then for next week when we talk about when the person is ready to begin their relationship with God. So thank you so much for coming to session 2 tonight. Let's close in a word of prayer. Dear God, we so love you and thank you for your presence in our life. We thank you for the Holy Spirit and helping us as we approach an unbelieving world. Thank you for the people you'll bring us into contact with this week, Lord. Help guide us through those conversations. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you very much. God bless you. Be safe as you travel home, and hopefully the roads are not slick and wet. See you on Sunday.